This area is for active duty personnel only. The voice was sharp, laced with the unearned confidence of a man who had never been truly tested. Lieutenant Miller, all crisp angles and polished brass, stood over the small table, his shadow falling across the old woman sitting there. She looked up, her eyes a pale, watery blue that seemed to hold the memory of distant skies. She was small, frail-looking, wrapped in a simple tweed coat that had seen better decades. A cup of steaming tea was clutched in her wrinkled hands, a small island of warmth in the cavernous, sterile dining facility of Fort Braddock. She hadn't said a word, merely nodded, but the lieutenant was not finished. He was performing, using his authority as a stage. "Ma'am, did you hear me? This is a military installation. You can't just wander in here and take a seat. I need to see your identification." His tone was deliberately loud, drawing the eyes of several young privates and specialists eating their lunch. They watched, some with amusement, others with a flicker of discomfort. The woman slowly reached into her worn handbag. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried, as if time was a river she had long ago learned to navigate rather than fight. She produced no ID, but a small, folded piece of paper. It was a visitor's pass, properly stamped and dated. Miller snatched it from her fingers, his lip curling in a faint sneer as he glanced at it. "Agnes Reed. Visitor." "Fine." He tossed it back onto the table. "That gets you on base. It doesn't get you a seat in my mess hall. The civilian cafeteria is across the post. I suggest you finish up and head over there." Agnes Reed simply looked at him, her expression unreadable. She took a slow sip of her tea, her silence a stark contrast to his blustering. This quiet defiance seemed to infuriate the young officer more than any argument could have. He saw a stubborn, confused old woman who was disrespecting his uniform, his position. He couldn't possibly see the steel that lay dormant beneath the soft, wrinkled skin, the history that was etched into her very bones. He saw only what his arrogance allowed him to see, an inconvenience. "Are you deaf?" he snapped, his voice rising. Private Evans, a fresh-faced kid of 19 from Ohio, shifted uncomfortably at a nearby table. This felt wrong. His grandfather had taught him to respect his elders, no matter what. He started to rise, to perhaps offer to walk the woman to the other cafeteria, but a look from his corporal froze him in place. "Don't get involved." That was the unspoken rule. Lieutenant Miller was known for his temper and for holding grudges. Evans sank back into his seat, his food suddenly tasting like ash. Miller leaned closer, placing his hands on the table, invading her space. "Listen to me, old woman. I am an officer in the United States Army. When I give an order, you follow it. Now, get out of this dining facility before I have you escorted out." Agnes finally spoke, her voice quiet but clear, carrying a strange resonance that cut through the low hum of the room. "I was just waiting for someone, Lieutenant." Her placid response was like fuel on his fire. He felt his authority being publicly undermined by her refusal to be intimidated. He needed to make an example of her. He picked up his own glass of ice water from a nearby tray. "Well, your wait is over." With a flick of his wrist, he accidentally tipped the glass. Cold water cascaded over the table, splashing onto Agnes's hands and soaking the front of her old tweed coat. A collective gasp, quickly suppressed, rippled through the room. The water dripped from the table's edge, a slow, steady rhythm marking the seconds of a profound and terrible silence. Miller straightened up, a look of mock surprise on his face. "Oh dear. Clumsy me. See, this is what happens. This area can be dangerous. You really should be going." Agnes Reed did not flinch. She didn't cry out or protest. She simply set her teacup down with a steady hand, the soft clink of ceramic on saucer echoing in the tense quiet. She looked down at the dark, spreading stain on her coat, then back up at the lieutenant. For the first time, a flicker of something hard and ancient surfaced in her pale blue eyes. It was not anger. It was something far older, far heavier. It was a look of profound disappointment, the kind a master craftsman might give a flawed tool. The sight of it made the back of Miller's neck prickle with an unease he couldn't name. He had expected tears, outrage, a sputtering protest. He had not expected this silent, weighty judgment. The moment stretched, taut and brittle. The young soldiers stared, their lunchtime chatter completely gone. They were no longer witnesses to a simple confrontation. They were participants in an act of deep cruelty, and the shame of their inaction was a palpable thing in the air. Private Evans felt a hot flush of self-loathing creep up his neck. He should have said something. He should have done something. He had failed a basic test of human decency, all because he was afraid of a lieutenant's temper. The water continued to drip, each drop a hammer blow against the foundation of order and respect the uniform was supposed to represent. Miller, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on him, tried to recover his swagger. "Well, are you going to sit there all day dripping on the floor?" he demanded, his voice a little too loud, a little too shrill. But before Agnes could respond, another voice cut through the tension, a voice that carried the effortless authority of true command. "Lieutenant Miller, what in God's name do you think you're doing?" Every head in the room snapped toward the entrance. General Wallace stood there, his 2 stars gleaming on his collar. He was a tall, imposing man in his late 50s, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in the sun. He wasn't shouting, but his voice had a quality that made the air itself seem to vibrate. He had been on his way to his office after a range inspection, merely cutting through the DFAC as a shortcut. He'd been drawn by the unnatural silence, then the sight of one of his junior officers towering over a civilian. Miller's face went white. He spun around, snapping to a rigid, almost comical position of attention. "General, sir, this civilian was in an unauthorized area, sir. I was instructing her on the proper post regulations." General Wallace's eyes, cold and discerning, swept over the scene. The pale-faced lieutenant, the watching soldiers, the puddle of water on the floor, and the old woman sitting soaked and silent at the table. His gaze rested on her, and for a moment, he simply stared. A strange look of confusion crossed his face, followed by dawning recognition, and then a wave of something that looked like horrified disbelief. He took a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving the woman's face. He seemed to be looking past the wrinkles, past the gray hair, searching for a memory. "My God," he breathed, the words barely a whisper. He moved past the petrified lieutenant as if he wasn't there. He stopped in front of her table, his posture shifting from that of a commanding general to one of profound, almost reverent respect. "Colonel," he asked, his voice now filled with a shocked deference that sent a ripple of confusion through the room. "Colonel Reed? Is that you?" Agnes looked up at the general, and a faint, weary smile touched her lips. "Hello, Michael. It's been a long time. I see they finally gave you your stars." General Wallace looked like he'd been struck by lightning. He glanced down at her soaked coat, then back at the utterly bewildered Lieutenant Miller. The granite hardness of his face returned, but now it was forged into an expression of cold, controlled fury. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "What did you do?" Miller's mind was a frantic scramble of confusion. "Colonel? This old woman? It was impossible. She was a civilian, a nobody." He tried to speak, but only a stammer came out. "Sir, I didn't know. She had no identification. She wouldn't." General Wallace held up a hand, silencing him instantly. He turned his full attention back to Agnes, his expression softening with an apology that was deeper than words. "Agnes, I am so sorry. I cannot begin to express how." She waved a dismissive, gentle hand. "It's just water, Michael. It's not the worst thing I've been doused with." The general straightened up, his back ramrod straight, and turned to face the entire room. His voice now boomed with authority, each word a perfectly polished stone of condemnation aimed directly at Miller. "Gentlemen, you are about to receive an education," he began, his eyes sweeping over the silent soldiers before locking onto the terrified lieutenant. "You see this woman? This civilian that Lieutenant Miller felt was so important to discipline? Let me tell you who you're looking at." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "This is Colonel Agnes Reed, United States Army, retired. But her file doesn't tell you a tenth of the story. Most of you are familiar with the Special Operations motto, the quiet professionals. Colonel Reed was one of the originals. Before the Green Berets had their name, before the Navy had their SEALs, there were operatives so deep, so classified, that they officially did not exist. We called them ghosts." A murmur went through the room. The term was the stuff of legend, of boot camp ghost stories. No one thought they were real. In 1968, the general continued, his voice like a history lesson brought to life. "During a covert action in the Annamite Range, A listening post of 12 American advisors was compromised and about to be overrun by a battalion-sized enemy force. There was no time for extraction. The mission was a total loss. Command was preparing to write off all 12 men. He took a step closer to Miller, who seemed to be shrinking inside his immaculate uniform. But one asset, operating solo 50 miles away, heard the faint radio chatter. Against direct orders, this lone operative abandoned their primary mission and moved toward the listening post. For 3 days, through dense jungle and enemy patrols, they traveled. They arrived not with a rescue force, but with knowledge. Knowledge of terrain, of enemy tactics, of fear itself. The general's eyes found Agnes's again, a look of shared, painful memory passing between them. This operative didn't attack the battalion head-on. They became a phantom. They set traps, created diversions, sabotaged supply lines, and used psychological tactics so effective the enemy commander was convinced he was being hunted by an entire company of demons. For 2 full days, one person held back 800 enemy soldiers, giving air assets just enough time to find a window and pull those 12 men out. The operative stayed behind to cover the retreat and walked out of the jungle alone 2 weeks later. He turned back to the room, his gaze burning. The name of that ghost operative was Wraith, and you were looking at her. The silence was absolute. It was a dense, heavy thing, filled with the sudden, crushing weight of understanding. The soldiers, who minutes before had seen a frail old woman, now saw something else entirely. They saw a giant. Private Evans felt a profound sense of awe and shame wash over him. He wasn't just looking at a veteran. He was in the presence of a legend, a hero from the very bedrock of the world he had chosen to join. Lieutenant Miller was trembling, his face the color of wet chalk. The foundation of his world, of regulations, of rank, of his own self-importance, had been utterly shattered. This woman, this quiet, unimposing figure, was more of a soldier than he could ever dream of being. Her service was written in blood and shadow, while his was written in ink and bluster. General Wallace wasn't finished. His voice dropped again, becoming personal and somehow more damning. The Distinguished Service Cross she was awarded for that action is one of 3. Her second was for single-handedly dismantling a spy ring in East Berlin that would have crippled NATO intelligence for a decade. Her third is so classified that the president himself would need clearance to read the citation. She has bled for this country. She has sacrificed things you cannot even imagine for the freedoms you take for granted, Lieutenant. The very ground you stand on was paid for by people like her. He gestured to the chair Agnes was sitting in. That chair? She has more right to sit in any chair on any military base in this world than you or I or anyone in this room will ever earn in 10 lifetimes. And you poured water on her. The final 3 words landed like physical blows. Miller flinched. He finally found his voice, a pathetic, strangled whisper. Sir, please. I had no idea. That's the point, Lieutenant. Wallace roared, his control finally breaking. The entire room jumped. Your job is not to have an idea. Your job is to lead with wisdom, with humility, and with respect. You don't respect the rank. You respect the person. You failed. You failed as an officer. You failed as a soldier. And you failed as a man. You have dishonored your uniform, this base, and the memory of every soldier who ever served. He pointed a trembling finger toward the door. Sergeant of the Guard. 2 large military police officers, who had been drawn by the commotion, materialized at the entrance. Escort this officer to my office. He is to be placed under guard until I arrive. Consider yourself relieved of all duties, Miller. Your career in my army is over. The MPs moved swiftly, each taking one of Miller's arms. The young officer didn't resist. He looked utterly broken, his arrogance stripped away to reveal the small, frightened man beneath. As they led him away, his eyes met Agnes's for a fleeting second. He saw no triumph in her gaze, no satisfaction. He saw only that same, quiet, devastating pity. It was the last thing he saw before the doors swung shut behind him. With Miller gone, an awkward and reverent silence fell once more. General Wallace took a deep breath, composing himself. He turned back to Agnes, his entire demeanor softening. He knelt down beside her chair, an act of humility that stunned the young soldiers even more than his outburst. A 2-star general, on one knee, before a quiet old woman in a wet coat. "Agnes," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "On behalf of the United States Army, and as a man who owes his own career to the lessons you taught me as a young captain, I apologize. There is no excuse for what happened here." Agnes reached out and gently patted his arm. "Stand up, Michael. You'll get your trousers dirty. It was a misunderstanding. The boy is young. He's full of vinegar and pride. We were all like that once, not like that," Wallace insisted, getting to his feet. "Not with that brand of cruelty." He carefully took her elbow. "Please, allow me to escort you to my office. We'll get you a dry coat and a fresh cup of tea. A much better one than this place serves, I promise," as he helped her to her feet. The entire room full of soldiers, from the lowest private to the senior NCOs, rose as one. They didn't snap to attention. It was a slower, more meaningful movement, a spontaneous gesture of profound respect. They stood in silence as the general escorted the living legend out of the dining hall, his arm protectively around her. The story of what happened in the DFAC spread across Fort Braddock like wildfire. By evening chow, every soldier on post knew the name Agnes Reed, and the legend of the Wraith. Lieutenant Miller was formally reprimanded and processed for an administrative discharge, his promising career ending in a puddle of water and disgrace. But the story didn't end there. The next afternoon, Private Evans found Agnes sitting on a bench in the base's memorial garden. She was staring at a wall inscribed with the names of the fallen. He approached hesitantly, his heart pounding. He clutched his cap in his hands, his knuckles white. "Ma'am? Colonel Reed, ma'am?" She turned, her pale eyes regarding him with a gentle curiosity. "Yes, son. Ma'am, I was there. Yesterday. In the dining hall." He had to force the words out. "I wanted to say something. I started to get up. But I didn't. I was afraid of what Lieutenant Miller would do. And I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't do anything to help you." Agnes Reed looked at the young private, at his earnest, guilt-ridden face, and she saw the future. She saw the potential for a good soldier, a good man. She gave him that same, faint, weary smile. "What's your name, soldier?" "Evans, ma'am." "Private Evans. Well, Private Evans," she said, her voice kind. "Courage isn't a switch you can just flip on. It's a muscle. You have to exercise it. Yesterday, you thought about standing up. You felt that impulse to do what was right. That's the first repetition. It's the most important one. Next time, you might just get to your feet. And the time after that, you might speak. Don't be ashamed that you were afraid. Be proud that you wanted to be brave." She patted the bench beside her. "Sit with me for a moment, Evans. Tell me about Ohio." As the young private sat down and began to talk, a lesson far more important than any taught in basic training was being passed from one generation to the next. It was a lesson in humility, in quiet strength, and in the enduring truth that the greatest heroes are often the ones you would never notice, sitting quietly among you, with nothing more than a cup of tea and a universe of memories.